spit into my face. They take a knee and our country is disgraced. Blood's been shed on me like rain. I felt their tears in every stain. No matter what you put me through, you can believe I'll always stand for you. Raise me up for the battle. Lead me from sea to shining sea. I'm the red, white, and blue. I'm here for you. Stop the hate and let's join hands and try and come together and make America great again. Monuments are coming down. They're pulling statues to the ground. History can't be replaced. Where men have died, time can't be erased. I've covered coffins. I'm many a wounded dying man have held me ragged in their hands and raised me up over the battle. Lead me from sea to shining sea. I'm the red, white, and blue. I'm here for you.
Yeah, I'm good.
Stop the hate and let's join
No, I'm just getting live. This song's been.
Try to come together and make America great again. Raise me up over the battle. From sea to shining sea.
Good light.
I'm the red, white, and blue. I'm here for you. Stop the hate. Let's hold hands and try and come together. Let's all come together and make America great again. Great again. I'm the flag.
Hey, bro. Oh, gotta unmute you. Hang on. Yeah, you gotta unmute yourself. There you go.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, man, I'm having problems getting it to feed to Facebook Live. For some reason, I can't get it to share all of a sudden.
Huh.
But I got it. You know, we can. I've got it recording, so we can at least get the dialogue going about the thing, and then upload it. I'll upload it to Facebook.
Okay.
I'd rather do it live so we had get the feedback coming on it because it's so much better. But unless you can try and share it, I can see if you can get it to go on. You should be able to share it if you go down to the bottom of the screen and hit it says more and see if it'll let you share it right there.
Let's see. I have reactions, chat, participants, and leave. I don't have anything like share.
Yeah, I gotta
Copy
figure out
link.
how to. All right, we'll record it and let it go, and I can edit this section out. Easy enough. But anyway, this week has been an awful week for El Paso as far as protests go. Again, you know,
Yep.
you've been out on the street every day following all of this stuff that's been going on, and I don't think a lot of people realize how many people have been out there trying to figure out why these people wanted to come to El Paso and tear our city apart.
Yeah. Did you know that there's another protest going on right now?
Yeah, I heard. I just got wind of it just a few minutes ago, kind of before I got home, and I don't understand why we gotta continue to have protests. But I did see a thing out there on Twitter earlier that Veronica Escobar is now backing the Black Lives Matter movement instead of supporting our law enforcement.
Well, I knew it was gonna be just a matter of time before she came out and explicitly gave support for the movement. Um, as my research is showing, the Democrat Party is officially joining forces with Black Lives Matter, as they did with the Women's March. And it's not surprising because this is part of a larger agenda that's set through large philanthropic organizations such as the Aspen Institute, the
Right.
Ford Foundation, the Atlantic Council.
Yeah, the amount of research that you've done on this is just phenomenal, and people need to hear this. That's exactly why I've been trying to get you on, because I think it's very important that people hear this message.
Yeah, the thing of the matter is I think that we've come to a place in our society where some actual accountability is starting to come forth. I mean, people have that's one of the signature things I think of the Trump presidency, is that there has been a crackdown on pedophile networks. There has been a crackdown on a lot of corruption that we were used to seeing, and had pretty much allowed it to be part of how business was done in America.
Right.
The deep state has definitely been on the run ever since Trump took office, and I think that these situations, the ongoing protests, COVID-19 before that, they're ways to shift the narrative away from um, getting actual progress with regards to taking care of some of the most pressing things. I think that in order for our society to continue, there has to be justice. We can't have this two-tiered approach to how people are prosecuted, especially
Right.
with regards to people high up in our government. And what this is doing, it's giving cover to a lot of things that were starting to come to light, as was the first 3 years of the Trump presidency.
Right. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. And the amount of research that you've done on this entire movement and everything that's been going on is just, there's so much information out there that you've had to wade through to come up with all of the theories, and then, proving your theories at the same time. The amount of research, people don't realize how badly these people want to destroy America.
Yeah, well, no question about it. I think that they are willing to destroy America in so much as it allows them to escape accountability for the things that they have done themselves. I mean, case in point, Woody Hunt and the outright looting of the city's certificate of bond
Yeah, the
structure.
certificate of obligation. Yeah.
People don't understand that if the city were to go bankrupt, they're going to lose about half of their property value just in one fell swoop.
Right.
Taxes have gone up exponentially over the last 12 years or so, and this isn't by accident.
No.
So it's certainly interesting to watch things come to a head and see how big business moves in order to escape accountability. And it's just sad to see so many people who I feel like a lot of people really are sincere in their beliefs, they're sincere in their wanting to have a more just and equitable society. But unfortunately, that energy gets channeled into the wrong avenues.
Yeah, water bottle, empty one. No, I was talking to my grandson. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
But all in the trash can. But yeah, you can continue. I'm gonna mute myself here.
No, I was just gonna say that I've been fascinated to find that since 2009, 2010, this movement that we're seeing now come to light has been being planned. With regards to racial equity, I mean, I think that that's a goal that is very undefined, that it's very hard to be, it's like Don Quixote going after the windmills. It's something that I don't think the government really has a business trying to ensure outcomes.
Right.
Going over and now in the position where we have our public safety being threatened, and this is just a big attempt to move the goalpost of this acceptable dialogue. Rather than looking at the interests that have gotten us to this point, we're focusing on things that, I mean, yes, America has had certainly has had its share of racism, and we've had a lot of things in our society that we've had to combat. But I think that if you were to look at the rest of the world, we have gotten closer to having a society that works for everybody. I mean, there's a lot of the issues have been taken care of, and I think right now we're living in an environment where there's equal opportunity access to technology, there's equal access to education, there's equal access to social programs. And so, you know, in America more than anywhere else in the world, I think that the individual has the right to self-determination and has a clear-cut path to progress if we so choose to take that path.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. I mean, you can, in this country, you can be anything you want. All you have to do is set your mind to it. And the programs are there and they're available to every U.S. citizen in the country. But people don't want to take advantage of them. And we saw that, you and I were involved in that discussion at UTEP with, you know, a completely left panel, you know, that they were all about the victimization of individuals in this country based on whether their gender, their race, you know, economic status, everything. Everybody was a victim of the system, was the way that I took that entire, the way that panel acted, I should say.
Yeah, well, I mean, see, it's part of a movement called intersectional politics, where people, you have just different groups that take turns pointing out like a victimization theory. And again, it's not to say that there hasn't been classism or sexism or racism in America, but we've certainly come much more further with regards to tackling these issues. And I think that getting caught up in the mire doesn't really do anything to address some of the places where people are actually benefiting from this racism. You know, I think it's interesting that rather than protest, the politicians and individuals like Woody Hunt, like Beto O'Rourke, who have personally benefited from racism in the form of the Glass Beach study and the downtown redevelopment plan. We scapegoat one of the only, in fact, police departments in the nation that very closely mirrors the police force, their makeup with the makeup of the rest of the community. You
Right.
know, in other parts of the country, disproportionately, there's white officers that police communities of color. Here, our police department much more closely mirrors that of the general populace, and so it just kind of doesn't make sense for such a pushback to be happening here locally.
No, I agree. I saw a chart yesterday based on people getting pulled over that actually mirrored our demographics across the board. You know, so obviously our police department is not the problem. You know, they've got, you know, they match the population demographically. So what difference, you know, it doesn't change the fact that we have people here that are trying to destroy that unity that we had, that are coming from out of town. You know, you traveled around downtown and found piles of bricks and all these things that the city, you know, that we turned it over to law enforcement so they could be aware of these things. And if, you know, had we not done that, could they, would they have known that stuff was there? And could things have gotten even worse too? I mean, I think that was a lot of work on your part by getting all that information out there to help quell some of this intolerance that's going on.
You know, the thing is that I've been seeing this playbook take shape for years and years and years. I've been attending large political rallies and
Right.
things of that nature for a long time, and so I've gotten to have a good awareness and an eye for this type of thing. It's not it's no fun, and it's certainly not a pleasurable experience, but I'm happy to be able to provide this service to my community. I mean, I don't know how
It
else
is a service. You know, you're making people aware of what's really happening out there, because that's one of the issues. Is it's hard to educate the populace on what's really going on. You know, because people take things for granted and they look the other way. And you know, this is right there in their face, but they're not paying attention to it a lot of times.
Well, and I think a lot of it has to do also with the way that it's framed by the media.
True.
The local media, much like national media, has taken the stance of trying to give the protesters a noble air,
Right.
trying to link them to the civil rights movement. But you know, I published a article today that was dealing with
Mm-hmm.
the divergence from the civil rights movement and now the Black Lives Matter movement. Some of the things that the media is not pointing out is the fact that one, you know, the Black church was foundational in the civil rights movement of the
Correct.
60s.
Oh yeah.
Now,
Absolutely.
go ahead. Today's movement is very rooted in witchcraft, as evidenced by the founders, their political stance. A lot of them also have been linked to anti-Semitism. You know, it's very troublesome, some of the anarchist networks that have made up some of the Black Lives Matter and Antifa networks that are just kind of coalescing now under a large banner of I don't know, F Trump. I don't know how else to describe it.
I think that's where it's at. I mean, you look what happened in Seattle this week. You know, 6 blocks of the city has been walled off for a law enforcement free zone per se. But you see some of the video coming out of there. One, the mainstream media is showing it as it's like a festival. But when you see some of the other video that's coming out of there, it's a dangerous place to be right now without any type of rule of law in there.
Yeah, and you know, funny that the they built this society to try to as a response to having walls, as a response to having police, as a response to quote unquote brutality. But that's the first thing that they did, was set up a perimeter check.
Mhm.
The
Yeah,
first
they're
thing,
checking people, like it's like you got to go through a customs check going into a 6 block area of Seattle.
yep. And so, I mean, when you look at it long enough, I mean, I think it really does start to become clear that there is a larger agenda afoot. And that larger agenda, it's my sincere opinion that it's trying to take away shift away from actually getting to who are the bad actors in our society.
Right.
I think that to that degree, we are getting closer to having prosecutions of bad actors in our society as the information becomes clearer and clearer. There's a clearer picture of the I guess actors in society that have brought on some of this inequity. I mean, the inequity doesn't really stem necessarily from racial prejudice at this point. It's more from globalist interests that are able to bend certain laws and the application of law to their own interests. I mean, you can look at just here locally with regards to the way that, again, not to beat a dead horse, but seeing the way that Mountain Star Sports has amassed a huge amount of wealth um, through the use of illegal. I think it's illegal to have been so deceptive against the citizens with regards to how the quality of life bonds have been voted on, and
Right. Yeah, and
just
a lot of people now have, are starting to see the light on these quality of life bonds and how much it's actually cost. It doesn't make any sense because they word this stuff. Like if you read the ballot when people have voted on bonds, when you start reading them, they're really not very clear on what they're actually for. They're written in a legalese terminology, so to confuse people and get them to vote a certain way on a certain item.
yeah, the 2012 quality of life bond, that one was particularly nefarious in the way that they did a bait and switch on the community.
Right.
The community voted on a Mexican American cultural center,
Correct.
and I mean, for all intents and purposes, a Mexican American cultural center. You don't have to really do a lot of imagining to see what that would represent. Using that ballot language to then try to sell or try to execute on a sports arena, that's just disgraceful. It's just completely disgraceful. And it's heartening to see that the Texas Supreme Court has stepped in. But again, our local politicians seem hell-bent on continuing the fight.
Right.
Um,
Which
in a
is
large
costing everybody more money.
costing everybody more money, and it's just really dividing the citizens.
I believe so. But it becomes that one elite class of people here in El Paso against everybody else in the city.
Yep.
And that's where we're at right now. With our local government for sure. It's like our current congresswoman. What has she actually done for El Paso since she's been in office? And you can go all the way back to the time that she was on the county commission. What did she do other than cost the average citizen of El Paso more money?
Not much. I mean, the children's hospital, that has turned out to be a huge drain on the taxpayers, and hasn't really done much to impact the actual quality of care
Right.
that people receive. So, I mean, it's just like a lot of other projects that the city puts their hands into. Doesn't really benefit much of the average citizen, and it just ends up being more of a an avenue for waste.
No, and I wholeheartedly agree. We go back to the number of city employees right now that have taken a pay cut and or been furloughed. You know, there was influx of federal money in response to the COVID um, crisis, as it meant, you know, that came up. And yet they still say they have a $26 million budget shortfall. How is that even possible if you just got, and Veronica was out there touting, she got $95 million for El Paso. Where did that money go? What is that money being used for? You know, we could have kept these people that work for the city gainfully employed without having reduction in services around the community.
That's a good question. You know, I really would like to see an analysis of where the money has gone and how much of that money has gone to fund projects, once again, that only benefit the top 1%, such as the arena and such as making up budget shortfalls for the baseball stadium. People don't realize that we're still, I mean, for at least another 20 years, are scheduled to be subsidizing these shortfalls
Right.
that come from the baseball stadium not being paid for with the hotel taxes.
With the hotel occupancy tax, which we have one of the highest, we have, I think, the highest in the state of Texas right now for a hotel occupancy tax.
Yeah. Which, and you know, things like that, it flies against the push for making our city more open to tourism. People are
Right.
not going to want to come and spend money here when they're getting bled through the nose for things like that.
Right. You know, that just doesn't, it doesn't make sense that they're taxing everybody to death in this, even with the amount of taxes that everyone's paying here in El Paso, it still doesn't improve the city. And every time that they try to justify this, you know, justify, we need a new tax for this or that, or these tax reinvestment zones that they come up with. When you actually look at the tax reinvestment zones that they've come up with, they are still not going to be able to fund those projects.
Yeah, no. So, you know, it leads then to the question that what can we expect for the future of El Paso, and how are we going to start turning the tide from this tax and spend style of governance into something that resembles any kind of budget, a balanced budget, or just something that would resemble a plan to keep us from going bankrupt.
Right. And we're very, and El Paso is one of the largest cities in the United States. It is, or in the top 10 of cities that are closest to filing bankruptcy. You know, what's going to happen when the city files bankruptcy? Because we're headed on that path at an astronomical pace. You know, one of the issues, I know I've talked to you about it, and you know, is freeing up some dollars. And it's not a lot of money to start with, of course, but you know, just eliminating the office of the city manager and going back to the strong mayor type government, because I think by doing that, it gives the people actually more voice toward the city council and the mayor to get what they want. And we won't see as much of this backdoor dealings.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question that we wouldn't be in the position that we are today if the city manager position didn't exist. City manager position was made, what was created in a move to get El Paso to be more business friendly, to cut some of the regulation and red tape and make things, you know, more accessible. However, as often is the case, the pendulum swung way too far with regards to being business friendly. It is business friendly, but to a point where it's business friendly shouldn't come at the expense of taxpayers
Right.
funding things. I mean, the whole thought behind the economic development practice, which is the foundational I guess basis for a lot of these investments, is that by attracting business, we would alleviate some of the pressures and some of the stress on the local taxpayers, and that burden would be shifted to businesses that would come in.
Right.
Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case, and that's not to say. I mean, ADP, they've done a tremendous job of being a very good corporate citizen, and they
Right.
are net positive on the local economy. However, I mean, we got into the business of subsidizing retail jobs, and I think that's one of the areas where we just went too far. The pendulum swung way too far, um, with in the benefit of being business friendly. And the only people that really took advantage of it was not out of town companies coming in. It was interests that were already
Already,
entrenched.
yeah, that we're already entrenched in the system. It didn't into the El Paso system as it was. And that's one of the issues, it's like as soon as it amazed me that it took them 2 or 3 weeks after Elon Musk was talking about pulling Tesla out of California before the city of El Paso even approached him. And I find that, you know, to be sad, to be honest with you, because how many jobs, good paying jobs, would that have brought to El Paso? You know, to
That would have potential to be a game changer, but unfortunately, one of the things that people don't realize is that we have a very high franchise fee with regards to electricity, and that
right,
franchise fee, if you're a a tech company, manufacturing company of any sort, energy costs are going to be one of your highest costs. And
right,
so this franchise fee, which has been used now to fund the whole medical center of the Americas, um, it makes large businesses of that caliber, it makes it a very hard sell for El Paso. And so
right.
that's one of the things I think that going forward we need to look at is how some of these franchise fees have been established and how they overall how they impact our competitiveness.
Right. Because that's the whole thing. If you're not competitive, you're not going to bring in the business. The businesses aren't going to establish themselves here. I talked to a aircraft maintenance, um, just talked to them this week about, that we could bring them here. They could run their hub out of El Paso, for their maintenance and for their cargo. It's a cargo airlines. They don't do passenger service. They do cargo, but they do DoD contracts. They do, it could potentially bring some very good paying jobs into El Paso as well. And, the thing is, the whole idea is they get into the same issues that you just brought up when I was talking to them, why they didn't even look at El Paso to do that. Instead, they put the facility in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Man,
Something that could have come here, another thing that could have come here to El Paso that could have had a major economic impact. It's the same thing we saw with the Toyota truck plant. Those fees, it pushed them out of here and they went straight to San Antonio. And people don't realize you bring a large manufacturer in somewhere, the ancillary manufacturers that come in with that make the raw product for the final assembly at that plant spring up as well. It just amazes me that nobody's looking at what would happen if you got one major manufacturer here, heavy industry manufacturer, and what that could do for the job market overall. Instead, we're worried about bringing a call center in or something like that really is a service-based industry job that's a minimum wage or a minimum pay job and minimum benefit.
yeah. And unfortunately, too much of the local jobs make up that specific type of job, and
No,
that's
they
the
do.
legacy of economic development over the past 15 years is many call centers and not much else.
Right.
With
I mean,
regard,
the biggest economic impact for El Paso right now is Fort Bliss. Overall,
yep,
that puts the most money into El Paso's economy. And I've talked to some business owners because when all the restrictions came out because of COVID, a lot of our small businesses depended on the traffic from Fort Bliss to survive. And, they're still struggling, at least now that Fort Bliss has lifted their curfew and the ability to go off the installation and shop. We'll get some of that back, but it still hurt a lot of these small businesses. And those same small businesses tried to apply for the payroll protection plan and were denied. Where was our city, county, state, and federal representation in that to make sure that it was handled properly so that the small business could have been taken care of?
Nowhere to be found.
No. But we had the major players here because they are savvy business people. They don't have everybody under one corporate umbrella. They have multiple businesses, so they can be called a small business. And as soon as that bill was, I bet you before the bill was even published, they had the criteria that they needed to do and had the applications ready to go to the banks before any small business had any idea that that was happening.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. I know of a business that, because of their relationship with the bank, they got moved almost to the front of the line.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's just unfair. That's what tends to happen with people that are entrenched in the local business and government community, is that they automatically get lumped in with some of the winners, or get the front of the line, not based on any kind of merit, just based off of relationships. And that's sad, because that's one of the reasons why El Paso just continues to lag behind other cities with regards to growth.
Yeah, and it's just like, and that I'm in the runoff, for the GOP nomination, and the things are coming up now that, because I'm not from El Paso originally, I wasn't born here, raised here, that I don't know anything about El Paso. And I think that I bring more of an outside perspective in on how to fix a lot of our issues, because you and I have actually discussed this before, because sometimes, you need that outside perspective. You've left El Paso and come back and you see a clearer view of what's really been happening.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really don't think that in this case, in really in any case, that race has to do as much as with occupational experience.
Right.
With you know, I just, in a lot of ways, that's the problem with El Paso, is that everybody knows each other, and there's this system of nepotism, this kind of good old boy network. And I mean, who knows? Who knows
Well,
what's
that's how I see things here in El Paso. Just like you said, it runs like a very small community, yet we're a major city, you know.
yeah.
And by running it like a small town, we have all these infrastructure issues that are going on that aren't being taken care of.
Yep. And so I mean, what that signals to me then is it's a danger to elect people to positions just based off of the color of one's skin, or the fact that they've been here the whole time. I would look at that. I agree with you. I would tend to look at that as something that's more of a handicap than it is an advantage to have been here. I think that in order to really understand politics, to understand business, you have to see the way that it's done in other places too. You
Right.
can't just, El Paso unfortunately isn't a shining example of progress, or
No, it's actually, progress has been suppressed here because of that. That's the way that I see things from looking from the out, coming in from outside and seeing everything that's going on. And I've lived here almost 10 years.
yeah. It's interesting because right now, well, prior to COVID, we were living through one of the, if not the most functional economies in the history of mankind. I mean, things were moving, and certainly technology is making opportunities or making a lot of things possible.
Right.
It's a whole new world out there with just new technologies taking place, shifting modes of production, shifting the way that money works. And so there's a lot of opportunity out there, but I wonder if we'll ever have a chance to go back and take advantage of this rapidly changing world, that's just making, for people of color, that's giving us opportunities that were.
They didn't exist before. I mean, there's so many opportunities out there for everybody. Like you said, and it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. These opportunities are huge, but they're just not here in El Paso. It's being, I won't say they're being oppressed, but they're being suppressed
Yeah,
for
I
a
agree.
certain group of people to remain in power.
Well, it's going to be interesting. It's certainly going to. We have an election cycle upon us, and I wonder to what degree the citizens will allow themselves to continue to be distracted by issues that really have no bearing on the future of the country and just serve more as distractions. And
Right. Well, it goes back to what the Romans did with the bread and circus. Feed them and keep them happy. Keep them entertained. That's all they're looking for, so that they retain their power. They give them a little bit of bread, but not enough to survive on, but just enough to keep them entertained.
yep, that certainly seems to be the case right now with these protests.
I agree.
It shifted the news cycle, and it's once again it is the topic of the day that just seems to be getting round the clock coverage.
Yeah, and the thing is, that's what keeps it alive. If the mainstream media would just stop reporting on it, I believe that it would slow down immensely. You know,
Yep.
but I think they changed the news cycle. If you really get down to it, because everything was COVID for better than 2 months in the news cycle, and then boom, now we have George Floyd being killed by a rogue police officer, and now that's this topic of discussion. It was to take your mind off of one thing and move it to something else.
Yeah, and it's a way that people escape accountability. I mean, the CDC and the WHO, as well as politicians and media that parroted the false information. What this is allowing people to do is to just escape having to say that they were wrong, having to admit that government and non-governmental organizations aren't always correct. Media doesn't always give the right information.
No.
And the thing is that the media cannot, if the media isn't held accountable, well, the media can't continue to misinform the public if it's not held accountable. And so that's one of the things that's certainly happening right now, is just a shift from accountability over to a new topic.
Right. And how do we hold the news media accountable? And now for putting out, bad information, because they've put so much of it out there, and you have to wade through all of that mess to figure out what's really going on. You look at with COVID, especially, we know that now a lot of the numbers have been inflated, to drive a certain narrative, and it's been both directions, up and down. So why is that the case? And it's to keep people distracted from something, that's very important.
Yeah, well, and and the thing is too that kind of like we're seeing Black Lives Matter, what first came onto the scene 2014, right after the death of Trayvon Martin. And though there were protests, you never saw it get to the point of having violent looting.
Right.
which is now the case, but it's been about 6 years down the line. The same way that things deteriorated to the point where now we had these more extreme forms of protest. I wonder too what COVID and what this pandemic, what it's going to look like in 3 to 5 years. They're already warning about the second wave and trying
Right.
to condition people to accept the new thing. You know, with regards to the funding of the WHO, the CDC, seeing that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is behind a lot of the funding outside of governments. What is this setting the stage for? A lot, there has been a lot of talk about mandated vaccines, and the dialogue that's being floated in the mainstream media. You know, you can see it right now starting, but certainly as the coverage has progressed, that has been where the conversation seems to be going more, is the mandated vaccination of a global population, which
Right.
would be a huge potential windfall for these entrenched money interests.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. And the thing is, we know, if you look at how effective most vaccines are, they're only 30 to 40% maximum effective. So do we really, all of these vaccines that are coming out or they're trying to do for COVID, is it even necessary for COVID, looking at the um, recovery rates and the hospitalization and the fatality rates? Because I don't think that it's a disease that, personally, I don't think we need to have a vaccine for it.
No, and you know, I think these the funny thing, the ironic thing is that these protests are kind of proving that these numbers and that this was completely blown out of proportion.
And it goes back to somebody that's involved in manufacturing vaccines, you
Yep.
know, because that is where Dr. Fauci comes from. This is all about, and he gave bad, how many times did he change his story, from between January and even March, on what was necessary to control it.
Yeah, it happened a few times. And, you know, and that's kind of the way that the discussion is framed oftentimes. You have people that there's a thing called the Overton window, and how discussion is framed and set. But at the very beginning, you know, the discussion was that if we didn't have an immediate declaration of an emergency, that we would see between 1 million and 2.4 million Americans pass away. That has been completely shown
Right.
to be false, laughably false. Um,
What is it?
but
113,000 people, I think they're listing somewhere around that right now, that they're attributing to COVID-19. But the thing is, how many of those people actually died from COVID-19? Because now we're starting to see autopsies being done that are disproving that they actually died from COVID.
yeah, you know, the jury's still out, and the information. It's going to be a while before we can get a very accurate tally of everything, considering a lot of the red tape that at the very onslaught. I remember at the very beginning of COVID-19, some states weren't even allowing people to do full autopsies to get to the bottom of the causes of death.
Right. And just mark it down as COVID. We need the numbers. Was the attitude. I really think that was because we need to justify our models that their prediction models. And I think that had something to do with it too. And the idea was to drive fear and panic into the people of the United States, which they did a very good job of doing with those models. Like when you mentioned, up to 2.4 million Americans dying of this disease.
See, well, now what's interesting though is like nobody likes to admit that they've been made a fool of. Nobody likes to admit that they've been had, and so I think to a certain degree too, that's why the American public has been so quick to transition into this now George Floyd protest mode because it's an easy way, not an easy way, but I think that it takes a lot of this energy that's been bottled up. People have been
Right.
sitting home with a lot without things to do, feeling with a lack
Without a
of
purpose.
purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just capitalizing on some of the worst aspects of modern life. It's
No,
it,
you're
it's
right. You're right on point with that. I mean, that is what it comes down to. And I said that Wednesday night, at the rally for the pro law enforcement rally that we had, ahead of the protest, the Black Lives Matter protest. And the whole thing was telling them, this is why people are so, they want to get out. They want to have something to do. And this was the way they did it. And this is how they've been manipulated.
yeah.
I don't know how many people we've seen from out of town that came here to agitate, to try and destroy El Paso. We have a very tight knit community, and I understand that, like we talked, discussed earlier. And I think it goes back to our Hispanic roots of this community that has to do with the family, because it's like you said, unfortunately, if you get caught on TV and you're doing something your mom doesn't appreciate you doing, you get caught on TV, you get home, she's going to beat the brakes off you. Usually in
Yeah.
a Latino community, that's kind of the way things work, a little bit more family orientated and more disciplined overall. And I think that's what saved us from getting into having a lot of major rioting here.
Well, I was really disappointed to see that there was another protest tonight, and it
Right.
just I wonder, when is it going to end, and what is it going to take for people to feel like their anger has been satiated?
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know how this can continue much longer, and how much more people are actually going to tolerate it. The people that don't participate, that go to work every day, that aren't professional protesters and stuff. Seeing some of the people that went to the Black Lives Matter protest on Wednesday, most of them were very young. I'm not sure if they were even voting age at that were participating.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of them were. Certainly not based off of my experience. I was really disappointed too. I feel like I did a good amount of reporting on the ground, and I found some pretty disturbing
Yeah, you did.
some things that the local media just completely failed to report on. Um, I don't know who's teaching the newsrooms what newsworthiness is, but man, they have just completely failed the citizens over and over and over. Not just with regards to the protest coverage, but in general with regards to the affairs of our local city.
Right.
That, I
And
mean, it makes
that's
you
the
wonder
thing.
too how long our city can continue to operate and function with this level of misinformation, ignorance. I mean, I don't know what else to call it other than flat out ignorance to some of the dangers that have existed. Luckily, that haven't become liabilities yet. But that's, once again, I was glad that there was a good amount of people there at the protest that were able to go and take turns having visual on different parts of the city, ensuring that the brick piles weren't taken advantage of.
Right.
But it I it's going to be hard for there to be a round the clock everyday vigilance on these types of things.
No, you're absolutely right. But the city, you can look at the city government failing the people of El Paso on that too, because some of these were construction sites. Why didn't they make the contractors pick this material up knowing that these protests were going to happen. Remember, they closed City Hall down for a protest that really didn't transpire.
Yep.
And it happened later in the evening, but they closed City Hall down the entire day and had time to, they would have had more than enough time to go around town, downtown, where this protest was going to happen, and make sure that these contractors cleaned up their mess so that there wasn't things that could be thrown or something. But I think the reason we didn't see that is that the people of El Paso aren't going to destroy their city over this.
Yep. Well, let's hope that that trend continues.
I really hope it does too, Louis. It's concerning, to say the least, that, you know, we've got, like you said, we've got another protest happening this evening, and we don't know how that's going to go. And you know, what's really sad about it is where it's happening. It's just down the street from our local congresswoman's house. You know, she should be out. She should show some leadership, I think, and be out there to say, hey, we need to stop this, you know, and quit trying to, you know, bash law enforcement for doing their job, because our law enforcement has done such an outstanding job with this entire course of events. You know, there hasn't been a lot of injuries on either side of the spectrum, with law enforcement or with the protesters. Yes, they did fire beanbags into a crowd, I guess, at Memorial Park, you know, and people got bruised up. But the whole point was, it was already 11 o'clock at night, the park closes, and they were told to disperse because really the park was closed. And then when people decided to stick around.
Well, in that day, if you watch video from the protests themselves, there was, for quite a while, the protests that were acting aggressively towards the police.
Yeah.
The police did, in fact, retreat and had a posture of retreat for a good amount of time before announcing that, and also giving protesters ample warning that it had turned into an unlawful assembly, and they were given an opportunity to leave without having an incident. But that's not something that people were interested in at the time.
Yeah, they don't want to hear that part of the story. The story was, oh, the police got aggressive, they shot beanbags at us, and they threw tear gas. But they did ask them more than once to disperse before that happened.
It's interesting because, you know, the parks had been closed. They continue to be closed per the mayor's edicts. They just in general, I mean, certainly at 11, that's the usual time that parks close in El Paso. I mean, it might be even 10. But
I think it's either 10 or 11, though. I mean, it's within reason. It's not, there's plenty of time, you know?
But I mean, that was on that was a Sunday. That Friday, we had been out, and I had seen you at that same protest. Mm-hmm. We had been quote unquote breaking with the edicts by assembling to have the park play date, which was
exactly. I mean, and the parks are open now. They're still calling for social distancing. But I think that did have some impact on it, with Raquel being able to get her message out there, because she had a strong message, you know, being a mother and wanting her kids to play outside and the reasons behind it were solid.
Yep.
You know, she did her due diligence on all the research that was necessary to call for those parks to be open. And the city, on the other hand, I honestly think want to keep people at home and keep them under this, for all practical purposes, house arrest, to maintain their control over the people of El Paso.
Absolutely, no question. And I think that there are outside influences even higher than the city council that are really pushing the agenda.
Oh, I honestly believe that. And, you know, we saw that with one of with the letter to the governor about keeping El Paso closed. We know that our congressional representative was wholeheartedly on board with keeping everything closed, because they're trying to push another $3 trillion stimulus bill through through the House. It's passed in the House, but excuse me, trying to get it through the Senate, now.
Yeah.
But we can't. Where do we get this money from? I mean, the problem is that people are going to be paying. The people of the United States are going to be paying for that for the next 30 to 40 years.
That's if our nation continues this long. We can't continue to print money this way and expect for our whole country not to go bankrupt.
Yeah, because that's exactly what happens. We look at what happened in Venezuela. As the economy started to fail, they started printing more money. Prices went up exponentially. The money became absolutely worthless, because you needed a wheelbarrow to buy a loaf of bread in cash,
Yep. Well, what this is coming down to, it's sure it's a showdown between Democrat and Republican parties, but I think more than anything, it's coming down to whether or not we continue to be nation states and have countries that have sovereign rights and sovereign just that are sovereign nations. I think that's what we're seeing right now is one of the last stands for a world that isn't united by one single rule.
Right.
That's a very scary proposition.
I'm right there with you on that. It's, and that's the thing that I think that the president did well with, if people would think about it. He gave the power back to the states to actually manage their crises. That if they needed federal help, they would get the federal help. But the federal government was the fallback if the state couldn't handle the issue.
Yeah.
And that's the way that a republic is supposed to work. And I think a lot of people forget that because they say, oh, it's a democracy. It's a democracy. The United States isn't a democracy. We use a democratic process for electing people to office, but we don't. It's still a republic. You can't win an election with just because you get. That's where it comes back to the electoral college. Even if you get the maximum, you win the popular vote. To keep the states to have a voice in the government, that's where the electoral college comes in, so that each state has an equal say in what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of our legislatures, especially at the federal level, have forgotten that the House actually represents the people and the Senate is there to represent the state, overall, the state. Yeah. And we've seen a degradation in state rights over the last 120 years, to the point that the state right now really has zero voice at the federal government level.
So what do you think are some of the solutions, or how do you think, immediately going forward, what are some of the things that we can do to kind of restore some of the order to our society?
Well, I think the states need to pick up more responsibility for what they're doing. It goes back to the sanctuary cities and things like that, because like with the immigration system, for instance, the federal immigration judges, if they write a detainer or a warrant, they can be blown off because they're not judicial judges. They don't fall under the judicial branch of government. They fall under the executive branch. So their warrants and these removal orders don't hold any water. That's one thing they need to be moved. That part of the system needs to be moved back under the judicial branch where it was. I believe it was Clinton that took them out of the judicial branch and put them under the executive branch of government. That's one thing. But we also need to people need to understand that the states actually have the power to regulate most anything within their borders. And by right now, the federal overreach is so deep because of the 17th Amendment. One of the things I would like to see is a convention of states to repeal the 17th Amendment and give the states some of their rights back that have been taken, once it was put in. And most of this goes back, it all started, if you really look at it, it started in 1913, the downfall of our society. And it has gotten, they have limited rights progressively over that time period. Over the last 107 years, you lose a little bit of a right somewhere along the lines. And it's done to you as, this is good for you because we're going to give you more safety and the government's going to be more involved in your life. It's been a move. I honestly think that if World War II had not happened, that Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have had us into a socialist society by the end of his, before he died, let's say, because he's the only guy that served or was elected 4 times to president. And he played upon the Great Depression to get all of these social programs we have now that are continually funded, but weren't intended to last forever. Some of them were designed to be permanent, like Social Security, but then there was a lot of other programs that were supposed to be temporary, and they're still being funded today.
Thereby rigging the economy.
Right. They're paying, face it, your Social Security benefits aren't managed at the federal level. They're managed by the states. As far as who gets what or who's going to get disability or whatever, in each state has different criteria for you to qualify. That's one of those programs that needs to be streamlined and needs to be done. It was a federal program to help, senior citizens that didn't have a retirement or a pension coming in for survive, so that they had a livable income after they were 65 years old, above the median work age. Now, at the same time, in 1965, when Medicare came out, they added it so that seniors wouldn't have to carry private health insurance by the coming up with Medicare. But what's happened with Medicare over the years is now that our senior citizens are actually paying again for the healthcare coverage that they were supposed to have, that they paid into their entire working year, and they paid more money into that program than they did into the Social Security program, based on the percentage of what comes out of the paycheck of the earnings. Yet today they turn around and they hit them for around $150 a month, depending upon how much they make, how much their Social Security benefit is going to be. They make them pay for the Medicare. They're still paying even after it was a system designed for them to retire with. People like myself that are retired, that have a full-fledged retirement, should we even, granted we paid into Social Security and I understand that part, but should we even at this point be able to draw Social Security if we're already getting a lifetime pension that is above what the Social Security benefit would be anyway? I think about these things all the time. It's the same thing with health insurance, with having VA coverage. I have TRICARE coverage through the Army because of being retired. I have those two, and I keep the TRICARE, of course, to have health insurance for my spouse. My wife has to have health insurance, and it's very affordable. But when we turn 65, we have to take Medicare, and that's going to reduce the Social Security benefit. So why don't we just give up the Social Security benefit completely and just stay on our military retirement stuff and have veterans that are on full retirement go ahead and stay that way? We would save a ton of money and be able to actually give our Social Security recipients the healthcare, the Medicare recipients, the healthcare that they actually need, and not have to charge them for it.
Well, that seems like it would just make too much sense.
Well, I think that's part of our problem, is that they make every issue, I believe that most issues are fairly simple to solve, but the problem is that each one of the political parties, and granted, I'm running on the GOP ticket, which I think is a much more responsible party than the Democrat Party at this time. So with that being said, the two political parties are part of the problem that has gotten us into this situation.
I agree.
Because there's too much money into the political side of everything. I think if we looked at how much money all the political campaigns generate in revenue, it would be, the number is astronomical. I mean, we can take a race like the Clinton Trump race. That was billions of dollars. I mean, we're not talking just a couple of $1,000,000. We're talking, $20 billion, amount spent. I think it was 20 and 12 or something like that. And I know Clinton spent exponentially more than what Trump did on the campaign. But him being controversial, he got the news media coverage for free that she wasn't getting.
Yeah.
But that's where it comes back to. It's also with the 17th Amendment thing. You get rid of the 17th Amendment, now we don't have these high dollar Senate races anymore. You're already electing your legislators for the state, and the senators are picked out of those legislators. And you also have a recourse that if a senator is messing up, the governor can recall them, can yank them out of the Senate. So that gives the state a little bit more control over what's happening. And I think at that point, it actually gives the people more control.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll also alleviate the pressure of the campaigns and all the campaign finance for senators. It's not going to happen now. You're going to take a lot of dollars out of the political arena.
It is interesting. Not a subject that I've had much education on, but certainly something now that I'm going to go back and be looking into.
Yeah, I mean, because you think about it, the amount of dollars that are spent. Look at the O'Rourke Cruz race and how many millions of dollars were spent in that race. I think O'Rourke raised close to $100 million. Ted Cruz was somewhere around 30 million. Yet if those races didn't have to happen, how much more even would the playing field be at that point? Because right now elections are really won and lost by who raises the most money, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a travesty. It's a travesty. And the other part of that is how much money goes to the media. The media themselves have become a cottage industry as a side to the elections.
No, you're absolutely right. And how do we do that? I mean, you look at the rates, generally speaking, for like radio and television ads during an election cycle are exponentially higher than they would be outside of that election cycle.
Yep. Some structural change is definitely needed.
I honestly believe that. We need fundamental overhaul of our government.
And that's why I can appreciate a lot, from what I understand, people in the political sphere, political realm, at some points aren't too keen with some of your style of campaigning, which is going after different interests or abuses in the system. But you know what? I tend to think that that's the type of leadership that we need, is to zero in on areas of abuse, areas that do need to be reformed and brought into account.
Just like the military housing issue.
Yep.
I've talked extensively on that one, on how poor quality that these contractors are leaving these government quarters in. The repairs, the stuff isn't being done, yet the contractors are making money hand over fist.
Hand over fist. And sadly, the government itself doesn't even have recourse to deal with these people, which seems to mirror a lot of the same situation that, in general, a lot of people in our society have basically gotten society to the point where they are able to they have a separate set of rules. It's a separate tier of justice, and it's sickening. I mean, that's where a lot of the failures in society are going. And if we could just focus on some of that, I feel like a lot of the problems that we have would start to fix themselves.
Yeah, I think so. I really do. And there, but it's just like we can use the DACA um, thing as another example of something that's very simple to fix, but yet when it was offered to be fixed, it was turned down because it's not a presidential election cycle.
Yeah.
DACA, I think I ran the plan by you that I have that I think we could solve it with, and it's relatively simple. You know, I think most of the issues are relatively simple. They just get convoluted because people need some type of platform or some type of victim that they can rally behind them to get elected.
True.
Well, Louis, all we can do is keep trying to educate people, just like you've been doing, with your articles and stuff. And a lot of your articles, I share them to Twitter and stuff, and they do get a lot of traction. I think that there is some impact being made. We just need to make a bigger splash across the board to get people to open their eyes up and see what's going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and hope I thank you for reading and for sharing articles. And I think that it's important to counter the media's narrative,
Right.
and to try to provide citizens with just information that
Just the facts, give them the facts and let them decide on their own. It doesn't need to be spun a certain way or something like that. Just give people facts and let them make a decision based on the facts, not based on an opinion. Because we look at the mainstream media now, how many shows, and I don't care whether you watch MSNBC, CNN, or Fox News, generally speaking, there is no direct reporting. Every reporter that's on there is an entertainer, and they have to inject their opinion into every situation.
yeah. No, it's sad, and what happens is that things get lost in a sea of emotion, and all you have is just a self-sustaining culture that is, heavy on rhetoric, but falls very short on actual accomplishment.
Substance. Yeah, there's no substance. You can have all the rhetoric in the world, and you can talk a good game, but can you put that game into practice? And that's a lot of what we lack within our government, because everybody promises the world to everybody when they get elected, but they have to remember that you're not there to run your own agenda. You're there to run the agenda of the people that elected you. You're their employee. Yep. And I think that's one thing that we need to stress to people the most is that any elected official, they work for you. And these people are putting themselves out of reach of their constituency is ridiculous.
Yep.
Well, man, we've been on here quite a while, about an hour and a half. Got a pretty good amount of stuff for people to do. I'm going to upload this because I was having those technical issues with the Facebook Live app, and I'm not sure what it is. Somebody's changed something. Either Zoom or Facebook has changed the way we can get on and share this. But I'll get it uploaded, and you can share it to as many people as you need to.
Great.
And I guess I'll probably talk to you tomorrow, man, at the convention, because tomorrow is the Republican convention.
Yep. Looking forward to that.
All right, man. We'll have fun.
Yeah, we'll have fun. See you tomorrow, Sam.
Thanks tomorrow, for having me. All right, man. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, bro. Hang on a second. I got to plug you back into my ear. You there? Oh, okay. Well, really? Well, I just got an hour and a half with Louix on the live.